My entitled sister wants me to babysit her kids for free, but when I refused, she tried to ruin my career. I've always had a complicated relationship with my sister Sarah. She's 4 years older than me, and growing up, she always had this way of making everything about her. I was the quieter sibling, the one who stayed out of trouble. And Sarah was a handful. She got into trouble constantly, but somehow my parents always gave her a free pass because she was the wild child. I was expected to be the responsible one, to clean up her messes, and even as adults, nothing has changed. Sarah has 3 kids now, 2 boys and a girl, and she's been struggling to keep up with everything. Her husband works long hours, and Sarah, who quit her job as a nurse after having her 2nd child, decided to become a stay-at-home mom. I work in marketing, have a busy career, and though I love my nieces and nephews, I don't have kids of my own yet. Sarah always assumed I'd be her go-to babysitter whenever she needed a break. It started with little things, like watching the kids for an hour while she ran errands, but soon it escalated to full days and weekends. Last week, she called me up in a panic. "Can you watch the kids this weekend? I know it's last minute, but we have this couple's retreat and we really need some time away." I hesitated. I had plans I rarely get to keep because Sarah's emergencies always come first. I told her I couldn't do it this time. I had work deadlines and my own life to manage. "What do you mean you can't?" she snapped, her voice dripping with entitlement. "You don't have kids, you're just working. Can't you just work from my house and watch them? It's not that hard." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Sarah, I love your kids, but I'm not your on-call babysitter. I have a job, deadlines, and my own responsibilities. You can't keep expecting me to drop everything for you." She scoffed, clearly offended. "You're being selfish. You're their aunt. Family is supposed to help each other out. I'm just asking for a weekend." That's when I laid it out clearly. "Sarah, I'm not saying I won't help you out ever, but I'm not going to be your free babysitter every time you need a break. You have to start finding other options." She hung up on me, furious. I thought that would be the end of it, just another argument we'd brush under the rug like usual. But I underestimated just how petty Sarah could be. 2 days later, I got an email from my boss asking me to come in for a meeting. I was confused. There was no reason for a meeting, and my work had been solid. As I sat down in his office, my boss handed me a printed email, his expression unreadable. "Do you know who might have sent this?" I read the email, and my heart sank. It was from an anonymous account, claiming that I had been neglecting my work duties, that I was always unavailable, and that I often used company time to handle personal babysitting gigs. It even claimed I had been bad-mouthing the company to clients, calling my job a joke. I was stunned. None of it was true, but the details, they were personal. The kind of details only someone close to me would know. Someone like Sarah. "I didn't write this," I said, my voice shaking. "I have no idea who would send this, but it's not true. I've never done any of these things." My boss nodded, thankfully believing me, but he still looked concerned. "I know this isn't like you, but it's serious. We're going to have to look into it." The rest of the day, I couldn't focus. I knew Sarah was upset, but would she really go this far? When I confronted her, she denied it, of course, acting all innocent. "I would never do that to you. Why would I even care about your job?" But the way she said it, the smugness in her voice, it was like she was daring me to prove it. Sarah had always been good at playing the victim, making everyone else look like the bad guy. My parents, of course, took her side. "You know how stressed she's been," they said, as if that justified her behavior. Days went by and more emails trickled into my boss's inbox. The accusations got more outlandish, and I knew I was being targeted. I was terrified of losing my job over lies, and every day I felt the walls closing in. I stopped sleeping, constantly checking my emails and messages, afraid of what would come next. I hired a tech-savvy friend to help trace the source of the emails. It took some time, but eventually we found the IP address. It was linked back to Sarah's house. When I confronted her with the evidence, she broke down, admitting everything. "I just wanted you to know what it feels like," she sobbed. "To be stuck, with no help, no options. You think you're better than me because you have a career and no kids, but you're not. You've always been selfish." Her words stung, but not because they were true. It was the realization that she truly believed them. In her mind, I wasn't her sister trying to build my own life. I was the enemy who wasn't giving her what she felt entitled to. I had no choice but to cut her off completely. It wasn't just about the emails or the job. It was about the toxic cycle of her taking and me constantly giving in. Cutting Sarah off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I blocked her number and unfollowed her on social media. I needed space, not just from her, but from the chaos she always brought into my life. But Sarah wasn't one to give up easily. A week later, I found her sitting on my doorstep, mascara running down her cheeks, looking like a hot mess. "Please just hear me out," she pleaded as I tried to walk past her. I wanted nothing more than to slam the door in her face. But she was still my sister. A part of me still cared, even after everything she'd done. I let her in, mostly because I wanted answers. Sarah collapsed onto my couch, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her together. "I'm sorry, okay? I don't know why I did it," she sniffled, tears streaming down her face. I'm drowning, Jane. I have no one." Her words hung in the air. It was the first time she'd ever admitted to feeling overwhelmed, to feeling like she was losing control. But it was hard to feel sympathy when she'd tried to ruin my life to cope with her own problems. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry you're going through a hard time, but you can't just destroy other people's lives because of it. You could have cost me my job. How was that supposed to help you?" She sobbed harder, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't know what else to do. You've always had it together, and I feel like I'm falling apart. I can't even take care of my own kids without losing my mind. I just needed you to understand." The frustration boiled inside me. "I do understand, Sarah, but you need to take responsibility for your actions. You can't keep blaming everyone else for your choices. I'm not your enemy, but I can't keep being your scapegoat." She nodded, sniffling and wiping her face. I know. I'm going to get help, I swear. Therapy, meds, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you. You're my sister, and I need you." I could see she was sincere, but it wasn't enough. Words were just that, words. I'd heard countless apologies from Sarah before, only for her to turn around and do the same thing again. I needed to see real change before I could even think about letting her back into my life. "I need time, Sarah," I told her firmly. "You need to figure this out on your own. I can't keep fixing everything for you. If you want to make things right, then do it. But I'm not going to hold your hand through this anymore." She nodded, tears still streaming down her face, and left without another word. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that I'd finally stood my ground, but guilt for turning my back on my own sister. I hoped she'd follow through on her promise to get help, but I couldn't let her chaos consume me anymore. Over the next few months, things were tense between us. Sarah reached out a few times, sending texts about her therapy sessions and the progress she was making. She didn't ask me to babysit, didn't ask for favors, just little updates to show that she was trying. I appreciated it, but I kept my distance. I had to protect my own mental health, and that meant keeping a safe boundary between us. One day my phone rang, and it was Sarah. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Hey," she said quietly, her voice sounding steadier than it had in a long time. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to say thank you for everything, for not giving up on me, even when I was at my worst." I took a deep breath, feeling a small sense of hope. "I never gave up on you, Sarah. I just needed you to step up for yourself." She paused, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "I'm working on it. It's hard, but I'm trying." We talked for a while, longer than we had in months. She told me about the changes she was making, going back to school online, finding part-time work that she could do from home, and learning to manage her kids without relying on everyone else. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the Sarah I remembered from before things got so complicated. But I still kept my guard up. I wasn't ready to fully trust her, not yet. And I think she understood that. She didn't push, didn't demand anything from me. She was finally taking responsibility, and that was enough for now. It's been a year since then, and Sarah and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. She's come a long way, and I'm proud of her for making the changes she promised. I still keep my boundaries firm, and she respects them. We're not the same as we were, and that's okay. We're finding a new normal, one that works for both of us. Sometimes I think back to all the times I caved, all the times I let her guilt me into things I didn't want to do. But those days are behind us now. I've learned to stand up for myself, and Sarah's learning to stand on her own 2 feet. We're still sisters, and that bond will always be there. But now, it's built on respect, not obligation. And that's a much better place to be. Things seem to be improving, but just when I thought we had turned a corner, life threw another curveball. Sarah called me one evening, her voice tinged with panic. "Jane, I need your help. It's the kids. They're acting out, and I don't know what to do." I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the stress that had been building for years. I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a flash of frustration. Sarah had been making progress, but it was clear that she was still struggling. Her children had always been a handful, a product of their chaotic home environment, and Sarah's newfound independence hadn't fixed everything overnight. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's like they don't listen to me anymore. They're always fighting, and the youngest is refusing to go to school. I tried talking to them, taking things away, grounding them. Nothing works. I don't know what else to do." Her voice broke, and I could hear her holding back tears. I took a deep breath, torn between wanting to help and knowing I had to keep my boundaries. "Sarah, it sounds like you're dealing with a lot, but you have to remember that this is part of being a parent. You can't expect everything to change overnight. Have you talked to their school counselor? Maybe they can help." She sighed heavily. "I tried, but they just suggested family therapy. I don't have time for that, Jane. I'm barely keeping my head above water." I could feel the weight of her words, the desperation. I knew Sarah was trying, but she still hadn't fully grasped that being a parent meant dealing with these challenges head on. She was still looking for a quick fix, and I couldn't be that for her anymore. "Sarah, I get that it's hard, but you have to take the steps to get things under control. I'm here for you, but I can't be the one to solve this. You have to be proactive, not reactive." She didn't respond right away, and I could sense the disappointment. I knew she wanted me to offer to take the kids, to give her a break like I always had before, but I stayed firm, determined not to fall back into old patterns. "Okay," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll look into it. Thanks anyway." After that call, I couldn't help but feel guilty. I knew I had done the right thing by not caving, but it was hard not to feel like I was abandoning her. I reminded myself that Sarah needed to learn how to handle her responsibilities without relying on me as a crutch. It was a tough love approach, and I hoped it would help her grow. A few weeks later, I got another update from Sarah, but this time it was different. She had enrolled her kids in a new after-school program, one that focused on emotional regulation and social skills. She told me how it had been a struggle at first, but slowly the kids were starting to adjust. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. She was also attending therapy more regularly, working on her own issues and learning how to manage her stress in healthier ways. For the first time, Sarah was taking responsibility, not just for her kids, but for herself. She even reached out to some old friends and started building a support network beyond just me. It was encouraging to see, and I felt a sense of pride in her progress. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still days when Sarah would call me frustrated and overwhelmed. But instead of venting or blaming others, she would ask for advice on how to handle things. And every time I would remind her that she was capable, that she could figure it out. One evening, Sarah called me just to chat, something we hadn't done in a long time without some crisis looming over us. "You know," she said, her voice lighter than it had been in ages, I never realized how much I was relying on everyone else to fix my problems. I guess I thought it was just easier that way. It was easier, I agreed, but it wasn't healthy. You're doing the hard work now, and it's paying off. She laughed, a genuine, happy sound that I hadn't heard in years. I know it's still a work in progress, but I'm finally starting to feel like I can handle it. I'm not perfect, and I still have bad days, but I'm trying. We talked for hours that night, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories about our lives. It felt like we were reconnecting on a deeper level, not as the dependent sister and the rescuer, but as equals. It wasn't the relationship we'd had growing up, but it was something better, something healthier. Sarah still had a long way to go, and I knew that there would be bumps along the road. But for the first time, I felt hopeful about our future as sisters. We were both learning to stand on our own, to support each other without losing ourselves in the process. And that, more than anything, was the biggest victory of all. The months passed, and Sarah continued to make strides. She had gone back to school part-time, working toward a degree in early childhood education, something she had always dreamed of, but never pursued. It was inspiring to see her finally chasing her own goals instead of just existing in survival mode. Her kids were doing better, too. They were still rambunctious, but they were slowly adapting to the structure and boundaries Sarah was setting at home. One weekend, Sarah invited me over for dinner, something she hadn't done in years. The house was a little chaotic, toys scattered everywhere, but it was filled with a warmth and energy that hadn't been there before. I watched as she juggled cooking, helping with homework, and keeping the baby entertained, and for once, she didn't look overwhelmed. She looked happy. We sat down to eat, and Sarah raised a toast. "To family," she said, smiling, "and to the people who stick with us even when we're a total mess." I laughed, clinking my glass with hers. "I'll drink to that." Dinner was a success. The kids were well behaved, for the most part, and Sarah seemed genuinely content. After the meal, we sat on the couch, sipping tea and catching up. It was the most relaxed I had felt around her in a long time. No tension, no resentment, just two sisters enjoying each other's company. As we talked, Sarah got quiet for a moment, staring into her cup as if gathering her thoughts. "I know I've apologized before, but I really am sorry, Jane, for everything. I can't believe how much I put you through, and I'm so grateful you didn't just walk away." I nodded, appreciating her sincerity. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've come a long way, and I'm glad we're getting back to a good place." She smiled, her eyes misting over slightly. "I couldn't have done it without you pushing me. I didn't want to hear it back then, but I needed it. I needed someone to hold me accountable." That moment felt like a turning point, the final piece of a long, painful puzzle finally clicking into place. Sarah was still Sarah, flawed, emotional, and a bit of a drama queen, but she was growing into a better version of herself. And I was learning to appreciate her without feeling responsible for her. We were both setting boundaries, and those boundaries were helping us redefine our relationship in a way that was healthier for us both. Before I left, Sarah hugged me tightly. "You're not just my sister, you're my rock. I want you to know that I'll never take you for granted again." I squeezed her back, feeling the sincerity in her words. "I'm always here for you, Sarah. Just don't forget to be there for yourself, too." Driving home that night, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it was moving in the right direction. Sarah was becoming more independent, and I was learning to love her without sacrificing my own needs. It was a delicate balance, but we were figuring it out together. A few weeks later, Sarah called me with exciting news. She had landed a part-time job at a local daycare center, which was perfect for her school schedule. She was ecstatic, finally feeling like she was taking control of her life instead of just reacting to it. We celebrated over the phone, and I couldn't help but feel proud of how far she had come. Of course, things weren't perfect. There were still moments when Sarah would call in tears, overwhelmed by the stress of balancing work, school, and parenting. But instead of dumping it all on me, She was finding ways to manage it, reaching out to her therapist, using the coping strategies she had learned. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. The more Sarah thrived, the more our relationship healed. We started spending more time together, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company again. We went on sister dates, took the kids to the park, and even planned a weekend getaway, just the two of us, to reconnect. As I watched Sarah navigate her new life, I realized that the best thing I ever did was step back and let her figure it out. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted myself, wondering if I was being too harsh or uncaring. But Sarah needed that space to grow, to face her own demons without using me as a crutch. Now, when I look at her, I see a woman who's no longer defined by her mistakes but by her resilience. She's still a work in progress, but aren't we all? The important thing is that she's trying every single day to be better. For herself, for her kids, and for the people who love her. And as for me, I've learned that being supportive doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It means knowing when to help and when to let go. It means loving someone enough to let them learn the hard lessons, even when it hurts. And it means standing by them, not as their savior, but as their equal. Sarah and I are far from perfect, but we're making it work. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're finally on the same team, not just as sisters, but as friends. We've come a long way from the constant chaos and drama, and though the journey wasn't easy, it was worth it. We've found a balance, a new normal, and most importantly, we've found each other again. And that's something no amount of family drama could ever take away.